Before the letters arrived, police in Northern California believed they were hunting separate, unrelated killers. The crimes were scattered across different locations, the victims had no clear connection, and the methods seemed random. There was no pattern, no thread to follow. It was a series of terrifying but isolated tragedies. But then the Zodiac changed everything. Overnight, the narrative shifted from a manhunt to a psychological war. The first move was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its audacity. 3 envelopes arrived at the offices of 3 major newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Inside each was not just a confession, but a demand, a threat. The message was clear: publish my letters or I will kill again. For the first time in modern history, a killer wasn't hiding from the spotlight. He was stepping directly into it, demanding its full glare. He wasn't just committing crimes, he was creating a spectacle. Contained within these letters were cryptograms, complex ciphers made of strange symbols, geometric shapes, and cryptic markings. The sender, who would soon call himself the Zodiac, claimed that these codes held the key to his identity. But there was a catch. If the newspapers refused to print the ciphers on their front pages, he promised more bloodshed. The threat was public, direct, and left no room for negotiation. Imagine the editor's dilemma. Do you give a killer the platform he craves, potentially inspiring copycats and spreading terror? Or do you ignore him and risk more innocent lives? Under immense pressure, the newspapers complied. The strange, almost alien-looking symbols were printed for the entire world to see. The public was transfixed, staring at the puzzle, trying to decipher the mind of a monster. Professional code breakers from the FBI and CIA were stumped. The cipher was unlike anything they had encountered. It was amateurish in some ways, yet fiendishly clever in others. The clock was ticking, and with every passing day, the fear grew. Then, an unexpected breakthrough came from the most unlikely of sources. A high school teacher from Salinas, Donald Hardin, and his wife, Betty, took on the challenge. Working at their kitchen table, they spent hours poring over the symbols, trying different letter combinations, looking for a pattern the experts had missed. And they found one. After 20 hours of intense work, they cracked the 408-symbol cipher. What they uncovered was chilling. The message wasn't a confession in the traditional sense. It was a manifesto of pure evil. The Zodiac wrote about the thrill he got from killing, describing it as the most exciting experience. He claimed it was more fun than hunting wild game in the forest because man was the most dangerous animal of all. He went on to explain his bizarre and terrifying motive. He was collecting slaves for the afterlife. He believed that every person he killed would serve him in paradise. The message contained no name, no address, no clue to his identity. Only pure, unadulterated arrogance and a deep, unsettling look into a profoundly disturbed mind. But the public in a state of panic, the Zodiac began his campaign of taunting the authorities. Every new letter was a front-page story. Every cryptic symbol fueled a new wave of public hysteria. The Zodiac had discovered a terrifying truth. In the modern age, fear was a form of power. He could control an entire city, an entire state, without ever showing his face. He had turned the investigation into a media circus, with himself as the ringmaster. To ensure no one dismissed his letters as a hoax, the Zodiac started including irrefutable proof. In one of his most infamous letters, sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, he included a piece of a bloody shirt. It belonged to Paul Stein, a taxi driver who was his latest victim. The fabric was a perfect match to the piece missing from the shirt found at the crime scene. There was no longer any room for doubt. This wasn't a prank. This was a calculating killer who was always one step ahead, playing a deadly game by his own rules. His threats became more audacious and widespread. He described future plans with terrifying detail. He talked about shooting out the tire of a school bus and then picking off the children as they fled. He threatened to plant bombs and commit random acts of violence in public spaces. These threats forced police departments to implement unprecedented security measures. Officers were assigned to guard school buses. Neighborhoods were put on high alert. The Zodiac had effectively turned the entire Bay Area into his captive audience, holding them hostage with the power of his words. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. By the mid-1970s, the steady stream of letters, ciphers, and threats simply ceased. There was no final message, no grand finale, no goodbye. The Zodiac just vanished. The silence was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. Investigators were left scrambling, debating every possibility. Did the Zodiac die of natural causes? Was he in prison for an unrelated crime? Or, perhaps most chillingly, did he simply get bored and decide the game was over? Over the years, dozens of suspects have been named. Some fit the profile perfectly, others were wild theories. There was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who owned a Zodiac brand watch and made suspicious comments. There were others, each with their own set of circumstantial evidence. But none of it was ever enough. DNA testing in the 21st century brought a surge of hope. Samples were taken from the envelopes he licked, but the results were either inconclusive or pointed away from the main suspects. The definitive proof remained just out of reach. More than half a century later, the Zodiac's letters are still preserved in evidence rooms. They are analyzed by a new generation of detectives, studied by amateur sleuths, and obsessed over by true crime enthusiasts around the world. They are the legacy of a killer who was never unmasked, a phantom who terrorized a nation and then disappeared into the fog. He never revealed his face, never spoke his real name. All that remains is his signature, a circle with a cross through it, and a mystery that stubbornly refuses to die. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history's greatest unsolved mysteries. See you next time.